Welcome to An Archbender's Journal, The Last Will of Lucy Sutton. I'm your host, Terrence Franklin. In each episode, we go on an odyssey to discover my family history, and I invite guests to share their stories to bend the arc of history with their own legacy. You can find the show through YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Now please, join me for An Archbender's Journal, The Last Will of Lucy Sutton. I'm your host, Terry Franklin. Hi, and welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have the Reverend Dr. TLC, Terrlyn Curry Avery, here with us. I appeared on her show a while ago, and I was just delighted to connect with her because we have a lot of things that are similar in terms of our interests and our desire to try to make the world better. Dr. TLC, could you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Well, I am, as you said, the Reverend Dr. TLC. I currently am a pastor of the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Presbyterian Church in Springfield, Massachusetts. I am also a licensed psychologist by training. And so I call myself a pastologist as well as a transformational leader as well, because I merge my love of pastoring and psychology together. And it's one of the ways in which I fight for social justice through this lens of love and this lens of, changing who we are internally so that we'll show up as our best selves in the world.
I love that idea of being able to bring together your passions and your interests. My story is about bringing together my legal background with understanding the story of my ancestors' struggles to be free. And so for you to come together and bring together those two aspects of your life, I'm always fascinated to hear people talk about bringing together and enhancing and not separating out the different parts of their lives, but really bringing things together and integrated. And that seems like that's a big part of what you do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so interesting. When I first brought the pastoring and the psychology together, I actually was focusing on wounds of religion. And I had this history of doing work on dismantling racism, but sort of, changed it just a little bit. And then when George Floyd was murdered, I realized that it was the calling back to what I had been doing around dismantling racism in some other areas. And even in the populations that I served, working with juveniles in the juvenile system who were predominantly Black and brown, or in high school, working with individuals who were predominantly Black and brown and seeing the disparities. And so now it's really just bringing it to a different level, because that's what we're called to do, is to keep growing and to keep changing and evolving and doing the work that we're called to do with justice. And um, that's where I am today. I'm moving from one place to the next.
Well, in the course of that, you mentioned the terms dismantling racism, and I know you have a book, and your book is called Dismantling Racism: Healing Separation from the Inside Out, correct?
Yes, it is.
Why don't you there you go. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book and what it's about and what you try to do with it?
So, really, the book on dismantling racism is really about getting individuals to take a look at themselves in order to determine why they or we want to engage in this work in the first place. As you know, when George Floyd was killed, the world erupted. And we had lots of conversations around dismantling racism, but a lot of people throwing money, at the cause. But the
Mm-hmm.
book really asks us to go a little bit more deeply and to take a look at three things: to look at our sacred motive. Why do we want to engage in the work of dismantling racism? To look at our selfish mindset, to examine those things within ourselves that would keep us from going the long haul, that will keep us from being committed to this work, and that we're jumping on the train that's trending, whatever that latest is. But this book is about sticking with the dismantling racism. And then the third piece is really about our shared humanity.
Mm,
Understand that in order for there ever to be racial equity, it's going to take white people and people of color working together to bend the arc of
right.
this, right?
I, again, you may not remember, but I'm a Buddhist, and so part of our practice is about humanity. I mean, it really is all about humanity over any other questions, and it's also about starting from looking from within and asking, what can we do? What can each of us bring? And so, I guess I'd ask you, why is it essential for us to begin with ourselves? Because you raised that question about asking us to look at ourselves first.
Well, it's so easy for us to point the finger at other people, but we can't change other people. We can only change ourselves. So it's very easy. I'll give you a really great example. So, a lot of the people that I work with happen to be white people. And to be honest, when I wrote the book, that was, you have to have your identified audience, right? It really was focused on white people, but I'm grateful that people of color have found a lot of value as well. But in my experience working with the white people that I work with, sometimes they get frustrated when other people aren't where they are. And
Mm.
I always say it's really important for you to stay focused on you, because if you start to focus on other people, you can't see one, your ability to change the world, because
Mhm.
there's something that would be stopping you. And two, you can't see the things that you might need to change about yourself that will make you a stronger advocate for
Right.
dismantling racism. And if you can't take a look at yourself, can't keep your emotions in check. And we can never resolve issues if our emotions are flying all over the place. So that's why it's important to take a look at ourselves. And I love that you reminded me about you being Buddhist and going within. Because when I talk about sacred motive, actually, in all three steps, there's always a process of sitting and going within and reflecting and listening.
Mhm.
Listen, we'll be shocked at some of the things that come up for
That voice, that tiny, still voice from within, that really speaks to us when we can take a moment to be in that quiet space, and whether that's quiet, peace, no sound, or whether for me it's chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. It's finding that voice that truly is your own inspiration, that's connected to our ancestors and everything that's past and everything that's yet to come. And if you can
you.
try and be in sync with that, at least that's what my sense is. How can you be in sync with that rhythm? And then you understand what you need to do.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Well,
Mhm.
you mentioned dismantling racism and this work that each of us needs to be trying to do. It seems so overwhelming. I mean, is it possible really to truly dismantle racism? I believe in structural racism. I know it exists. And I know there are a lot of deniers and people who, because they haven't had to face it or experience it, think, well, there's no racist intent in this action, or, I'm not intending to harm anybody, but the structures of society are already in place and are already exist. And to do nothing means racism stays in place. And so,
Yeah.
how do we dismantle that? I guess that's the challenge.
Well, it's so interesting to your question. Because one, racism doesn't require intent or malice. And that's very important for your listeners to know, because we can say something racist, we can do something racist without there being the intent, and the impact can really be the same. And do I believe that it's possible? Yes, because of my ancestors. My ancestors were enslaved. And prior to being enslaved, uh, they walked the shores of Africa as free people. And so when we look at history, we can see how history has changed over time. And I, for one, will honor my ancestors by stepping up to the plate to say there is something that can be done. Otherwise, their living has been in vain. Their
Right.
dying has vain. So, do I think it's possible? Yes. So, how is it possible? We do what we can. As Arthur Ashe says, we start where we are, use what we have, and do what we can. And that's for every person. It doesn't matter your color. There have been white people who fought in civil rights movement in the abolition, who were abolitionists. So to say that it's impossible, our world has changed tremendously.
For
I
sure.
know that there are a lot of disparities that still exist, but it's changed tremendously. So yes, and that's why I'm going to keep fighting, and that's why I'm going to keep, because what I do matters, and Terry, what you do, it matters. Each of us.
In my family story, as I tell it, we know that there's Lucy pushing John, the man who owned her, to do the will that would set her family free. We know that they moved 100 miles with 400 cows from Georgia to Florida, thinking that he could set them free there, only to discover that he couldn't. So that's why he did the will that allowed them to ultimately be free. Ultimately, there was a judge who upheld the will and said it was valid, even though his brother challenged it. And each one of these people played an essential role in this ultimate quest for freedom. And so I use that, and I think you would echo that too, to for each person to recognize that they have a role to play in moving that ball forward. An abolitionist in 1842 on my other side who set all his enslaved people free with a note that said, "I don't believe that one people should be owning another people," and sent them off with money, and they established free communities in Kentucky and in Illinois. He couldn't have envisioned the world that we live in today. And so I think you're suggesting that when we say, how can we get rid of racism? We got rid of slavery, at least in the form that it existed then.
Exactly. And the other thing is I it's interesting that you said he couldn't envision it, because I actually think he could. So I went to visit the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Byway, and it's in Maryland, Southern Maryland. For any of your listeners, if you're ever there, you have to visit this. And I remember going and sitting in Dorchester County, right where the enslaved people used to go to auction. And
Hmm.
I was sitting there just quiet, no one else around. My companion was walking somewhere close by, and I thought Harriet could see it. She could see a moment where we would be free. And it's because of that that she fought. And so I want to just invite your listeners. We may not live to see the day when racial equity will be fulfilled in the way that we would love for it to be, but we have to envision something different. We have to be able to look at it. And that's what we are pointing towards. We're
Right.
pointing towards vision, not in the quote unquote reality that we're living in now. It's
Yeah.
all about a thought and what we believe can happen. And that's why in my book I talk about the sacred intelligence journey of faith, because it is a faith journey. It's not about
Right.
being religious, but it's about having faith that we can change the world.
Right. The proof is in taking the action. You may not see an immediate response, but we as Buddhists would say, everything is cause and effect. You have to be making the causes and know that the cause and the effect is instantaneous. So while you take this effort now, even if you don't see the immediate result in something that is visible to you, the effect is immediate. And I love, I enjoy talking to you, and I think you have the same sense that I have of this connectedness to each other and to our descendants and our ancestors. And I wonder, before we go, if there's anything that you would recommend that people make sure they do if they want to try to bend the arc of history towards justice.
So yes, I would recommend is to find that thing that you are fearful of in the fight to dismantle racism and walk toward it, because it's easy to give out money. It's easy to say that I attended a class and I'm woke now, but find the thing that you're fearful of and do it. I had someone on my show yesterday to say to me, when white folks come up to him and say, "Oh, I just took this wonderful course for 45 minutes and, now I'm woke." And he said, "I'll ask them, have you ever attended a Black funeral?" Because when you've done that, it's about the relationship. So, what I want the listeners to understand is that we have to have deep interracial relationships, and you can't get that in a book. You can learn some things, but you can't get it until you do and walk towards the thing that you're most fearful of. And that might be forming those relationships.
You can't just zoom in and out.
No, no, you can't.
Well, this has been such a great chat. I love talking to you, and I look forward to doing something, sharing another moment with you sometime in the future. And I wish you great success with your book, Dismantling Racism, Healing Separation from the Inside Out, and to all the work you do. So thank you so much, Dr. TLC. Have a great
Thank
weekend.
you.
Thank you for tuning in to an Archbender's Journal, The Last Will of Lucy Sutton. I've been your host, Terrence Franklin. You can find this show through YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Thank you for your positive feedback, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.